Right. Thank you, everybody, for participating this evening. We are so pleased to be able to bring you tonight's program on the history of the St. Paul Hiking Club. And we want to thank all of our speakers tonight, as well as the St. Paul Hiking Club, who have been a great partner in presenting and setting up this program. You may find out more about RCHS on our website, which is on the screen, www.rchs.com. And that will show you more upcoming programs, how to join or donate, membership benefits, and a lot more. Please consider supporting the Ramsey County Historical Society. We rely on the support of members and friends like you to continue to present these programs and all of our efforts. And there are some great benefits to joining, including our quarterly magazine, Ramsey County History, which published an article this winter, which inspired tonight's program on the Hiking Club. This program will be recorded and available on our RCHS YouTube channel within a few days. Some technical reminders: please keep your microphones and personal cameras turned off. And please feel free to type your comments and questions in the chat box. We'll have questions at the end of the program. And then after the program, I'll turn off the recording and you may turn on your microphones and cameras so we can all chat together. Again, please check out rchs.com for upcoming programs. We have some great programs coming up, including a very important program that's going to cover with Professor Carlos Hill on the Tulsa Massacre. This is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. The Ramsey County Historical Society has a statement that acknowledges the sacred Dakota land. Minnesota Makoche, the land where the waters are so clear they reflect the clouds, is the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people. It is also home to the Anishinaabe and other indigenous peoples. The Ramsey County Historical Society acknowledges that its sites are located on and benefit from these sacred Dakota lands. Ramsey County Historical Society is committed to preserving our past, informing our present, and inspiring our future. Part of doing so is acknowledging the painful history and current challenges facing the Dakota people, just as we celebrate the contributions of Dakota and other indigenous peoples. You can find our full land acknowledgement statement on the website, and the full statement includes actionable ways in which Ramsey County Historical Society pledges to honor the Dakota and other indigenous peoples of Minnesota Makoche. The Ramsey County Historical Society is committed to presenting the stories and histories of all in our community, and we are so pleased to bring you tonight's program. So let me introduce our Master of Ceremonies tonight, Meredith Cummings. Meredith has completed 33 half marathons and 1 full marathon. In 2018, she and a friend trekked the 500 miles across Spain along the famed Camino de Santiago. During the pandemic, she and her husband have hiked at 37 Minnesota state parks and recreation areas. She is the editor of the Ramsey County History magazine. So Meredith.
Robin. Welcome, everyone. To begin, I would like to introduce our panel. And let's start with Pat Hustings. Pat lives in Maplewood with her sister Barb. She retired in 1989 after 30 years with St. Paul Insurance Companies, which is now Travelers. That year, she heard about the St. Paul Hiking Club from neighbors. She joined and has been a member of the group for 32 years. In that time, she has developed lasting friendships and has walked with fellow hikers all over the Twin Cities, staying in shape and meeting people with diverse interests and backgrounds. One other interesting thing about Pat, she is a volunteer police officer. So of course, walking keeps her in top shape. Our next panelist is Donna Naumann Jensen, who works for North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale Independent School District 622 for 30 years and earned a degree from Metro State a little later in life. She has served as evening chaplain at St. John's Hospital and as the spiritual care outreach coordinator for the Metro East Program for Health. She has also worked at the Red Cross Tissue Services as the Red Cross Tissue Services liaison in northern Minnesota and the state coordinator for Minnesota Operation Lifesaver. In retirement, she ushers at the Ordway Center for Performing Arts when it's open, and loves to hike, bike, travel, cook, read, and golf. And she recently took up bocce ball. Our next panelist is Janice Quick, who joined the club in 2002. And in 2004, she hiked 330 miles with the club. She received, as she said, a small paper award for her achievement. If she could only find that award, she would show it to you. Since retiring from the University of Minnesota in 2002, she has been hired 3 times to take people for walks. Once through a weight loss study that required participants to walk 2 to 3 miles a week. Another time, she led history walks for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and then started senior citizen walks for St. Paul Parks and Rec. There's nothing like getting paid to walk. Last note on Janice, she has also written articles for Ramsey County History Magazine, and her most recent article is titled Born in Ukraine, Sculptor Anton Palos, which was published in the fall of 2022. And our final person on the panel is Bob Tholkes, who's president and historian of the St. Paul Hiking Club. The Columbia Heights resident is a retired teacher and also worked as a trainer with Target Corporation. He prefers club hiking to solo hiking and estimates that he's walked over 600 miles since joining the club in 2012. Bob has researched and wrote Take a Hike, A Century of Walks with the St. Paul Hiking Club for the winter 2021 issue of the Ramsey County History Magazine. You may purchase a copy on our website at www.rchs.com or see the article online under the publications section. All right, so tonight we have these folks here that we're introducing from the St. Paul Hiking Club. We're thrilled to have current and former members with us to share their experiences of the club over the last 30 plus years. And thanks to the diligent research of Club President Bob Tholkes, we also will hear about some of the organization's founders and early members. So with that, let's begin with Bob. Bob, why don't you tell us about the club founding, its inaugural hike, and what several members did this past January to commemorate the first gathering.
Thank you, Meredith. The story as I've seen it about the club's founding is that in 1920, the Minneapolis Hiking Club was formed, possibly by the Minneapolis Parks Department, which came to the attention of the St. Paul Parks Department, which of course had to have something that its civic rival Minneapolis had to have. The director, the story goes, knew that one of his employees, a stenographer named Grace Cummings, was interested in walking, and he asked her if she thought a club could succeed in St. Paul under the park department's sponsorship. And so presumably they advertised for participants in the newspapers, there being no other mediums of communication. And a significant number of people responded, and the first hike was scheduled for, naturally, this being Minnesota, the middle of January, January 15th, 1921. The procedure they decided on was to gather at the Parks Department office in the federal building, now known as Landmark Center. They got on a streetcar at the center, took it out to the end of the line, and hiked from there. The line they took on January 15th, a Saturday, ended at Burns Avenue and English Street on the east side of town. And they proceeded from there to a prearranged destination. They had contacted the Highwood Neighborhood's Men's Club, which met at Samuel Sergeant Taylor School in Highwood, and arranged to use that building for a couple of hours for refreshments and games. So they walked the 3 miles from Burns Avenue and English Street, perhaps across country, there not being anything in the way then, or perhaps along Point Douglas Road, which at that time ran continuously from downtown St. Paul to Point Douglas. That took about an hour. They spent a couple hours at the schoolhouse, and then, according to the story that appeared the next day in the St. Paul Dispatch, almost everyone walked back. A few took the train instead. The Highwood neighborhood boasted both a school and a commuter train station, at the time called the Burlington Motor. They got back to the end of the streetcar line and went their separate ways. When the club sort of succeeded, at least it's survived. The Minneapolis club, by the way, folded up in 2010, so it lasted a mere 90 years. And in order to celebrate the centennial, we decided in 2020, before the pandemic started, to gather as many people as possible together for a photo at the original destination, which research determined was still standing, had morphed from being a schoolhouse to the men's club headquarters, and from when the men's club folded up, became a private residence, which is what you see in the photo. The building, to me, with the add-ons removed, easily resembled a 2-story, 2-room country schoolhouse as it had started out in 1890. The pandemic put an end to the original January 15th plan. At that time, gatherings of more than 10 outdoors or indoors was forbidden by the state. So we have had to shuffle, but a small group still wanted to mark the exact anniversary, and so met at the original destination in January 2021 for the photo you see here.
All right, I'll fix the slide here in just a second, but I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself and I couldn't find it. Sorry about that. Okay, so my next question, so we know that the St. Paul Hiking Club wasn't the first club in the area. The Ramsey County Historical Society's Mary Livingston Griggs and Mary Griggsburg Research Center has a small collection, including this one from 1910. How would you like to hike in those clothes? So what a difference a decade makes. And I'm sure the folks who started in the 1920s were happy to ditch the fancy dresses and the big hats for more practical clothing. I can get that one to go. Maybe. For more practical clothing, hiking skirts, knickers, and knee-high boots. Bob, while you're talking, I'll fix this screen here, but why don't you tell us about those early years in the 1920s and why this hiking club was one of the dozens and dozens of social clubs that were popular through the end of the Depression. Being so social, what kind of fun did they have?
The hiking club has always been a combination exercise group and a social club. In those early days, unfortunately there's only limited exact information about the club. We do know that that the hikes were arranged by the Parks Department for the first couple of years. Then in 1923, perhaps at the urging of the department, the club organized as the hiking club, held a meeting, elected officers, and decided on its procedures. Which was, but that didn't mean any major changes were made at the time. So the club has been self-governing since the end of 1923, but retained its affiliation with the Parks Department, I believe, into the 1980s. They began taking bus trips, such as the one there in 1924 at the St. Croix River Valley, in addition to the twice weekly hikes from downtown that were that originated downtown. By the way, the lady in the exact center of the picture in the midi blouse is our founder, Grace Cummings. She apparently was still a member of the club in 1924. We don't know exactly how long she continued. The oldest surviving club roster dates from 1929. And her name and the name of her husband, whose name I'll remember pretty quickly, did not appear on that first available roster. Her spouse was someone she met at the club. They got married, I think 1924 or 1925, and eventually had several children, which may account for her not continuing as a member. That sort of thing seems to get in the way.
And her husband was Gerald Villers.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So her name became Grace Cummings Villars. And to anticipate again and complete Grace's story, she lived a long and a fruitful life as a caregiver, and was still around to be feted when the club celebrated its 70th anniversary in 1991. The club was still a custom I revived, makes an annual hike to her gravesite at Sunset Memorial Gardens in Northeast Minneapolis.
That was one of the first hikes I went on with you, Bob, when we first met, as you took me on a hike over there. So that was kind of fun to see that. All right.
I've since moved that hike to the last opportunity before Halloween to take advantage of the dark and the atmosphere that time of year. No reflection on Grace.
All right, great. What were some of the other social activities they did in those early years, Bob?
That group, as you can perhaps tell, was a bunch of 20-somethings. Grace herself was 22 when she founded the club. That means that the social activities they did would reflect their age at the time. They gathered to play games. They held dances. Anything else they could think of to amuse themselves. And the club spawned several marriages besides Grace and Gerald over the years. A club yearbook has a list of the marriages, which is quite extensive. It had that function also.
All right, before we go on to talk about the 40s and 50s, we're going to flash forward a little bit to a few more recent years. And I want to start with Pat. Before we talk, so Pat, you joined in the 1980s, I believe. What was the club like then compared to what Bob just talked about? And why did it appeal to you? And what did you get out of it?
Oh boy, as far as comparison, I'm not too good at that right now. I don't know. They still do their hikes. They get, they meet together. Although I was looking at a couple of those older pictures and I got a kick out. Those guys were wearing boots, that rugged terrain they were on, you know, and I don't know if they did that all the time or if that was, you know, special occasions. But I don't know, I got a lot out of it, like just friendships, meeting other people, all the different neighborhoods and places that I had never seen before. I mean, even up to I haven't been hiking now, been able to hike the last couple of years. A little trouble with my knees. But I mean, I was still seeing new stuff, even in, you know, like 17, early, you know, 2018. There's stuff all those years, you know, just seeing different neighborhoods, all the different people I've met. And that in itself is, I enjoy it too, you know. I got a lot of good exercise and it was healthy. So I don't know.
What were some of the neighborhoods that were surprising or that you had never visited before?
Oh man, oh, now you got me. Oh man, I mean, so far I've got the sheets. I know there's more of them, but I've got sheets back to not too far. Geez, I'm trying to think. 19, maybe 2018. I think I've got the sheets. Or anyway, and I even go back and look at those once in a while and I see all the different places. You know, I mean, there's been, heck, I know it sounds kind of funny, but even hiking in the cemeteries, you know, all the different parks and neighborhoods I had never seen before. So I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. I look forward to it.
Okay.
So.
Janice and Donna, it's your turn now. I'm going to give a little quote here to start. The 19th century naturalist, Henry David Thoreau, was an avid walker in and around Walden Pond and Concord, Massachusetts, and elsewhere. He even came to Minnesota. I don't know if you guys know that, but he came to Minnesota once to do some hiking. The doctor said it would be good for him. I'm not sure how Minnesota weather would be good, but anyway, so he wrote a book about walking, and in it he said, "I think I cannot preserve my health and spirits unless I spend 4 hours a day at least, and it is commonly more than that, sauntering through the woods and fields, absolutely free from all worldly engagements." Mm-hmm. So Donna and Janice, why do the two of you walk? And if you would share your most memorable experiences with the club.
I'll go ahead and start. I joined at the invitation of a friend, and with that, I wasn't a longtime member, but I do remember what was unique for me was when I would walk with one new member, and then the stories they would relate about their life or some particular event going on with them. And one in particular individual shared that he had been a child he was a Holocaust survivor, and he had been a child in the camps. And that story has stuck with me all these years. And I remember his name and everything. But those are the kind of relationships that when you're walking and you're free to not do anything else, it's a way to just open up, I think. And talking about going and walking through cemeteries, I lived by a cemetery for 25 years. That walk at night through the cemetery, not nighttime, but dusk, put everything in perspective from the whole day, from the whole week. It just puts it all in perspective.
You know, a lot of the hikes do take us along wooded paths or along lake shores, and those, you know, those are always pleasant. But when you're talking about Walden, I think of that as being very solitary, a very solitary form of communing with nature. And honestly, the hiking club is very social.
Yes.
I once proposed that we have a silent hike, and nobody liked that idea. They might have known that I would be the least likely to be able to actually stay quiet for an hour. But the end result was that they just said, no, not going to happen. They wanted to be able to talk with each other the whole time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it really is a social club. Like Bob said, we're there for the exercise, but we're also there because we're learning from each other and we're making friendships that last a lifetime.
Right. And that's where Janice and I met. And that's 10 or 11 years ago now, at least.
At least, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I walk too fast. And so I'm mostly a solo walker unless people can keep up with me.
Yeah,
So-
explain, Donna, why it is you walk so fast.
I have long legs.
You're tall, right? You're
Tall. I'm very tall.
Yeah, and my walking friend that I've done so many walks with, including across Spain, I'm 5'6", she's 6'2".
Okay.
And so when we walk the half marathons, I say she does a half marathon, I do twice that because I take twice as many steps.
My sister-in-law, who I walk with often, is about 5'4", and I'm 5'8.5". So, yeah, she has to take about two steps to my one.
And I think I belong to a different group, not your group, but a different group here in the Twin Cities. And I think what I like is that with a big enough group, there's a place for everybody. There are the fast walkers
Yes,
who are the
yes.
leaders. There are the people in the middle who are kind of watching both ends of it. And then there's people at the end. And everybody kind of finds their place. And then you don't have to stay in that place either. You can kind of switch off and change up conversations. And that makes it well worth it, doesn't it?
I was just in Detroit Lakes a couple weeks ago with my granddaughter, and there's a local newspaper up there, and I was very happy to see a Becker County Women's Hiking Club. And it was being advertised in the paper, and it was really cool. So it's more and more. First of all, it's not expensive, and with COVID, it's easy to do. You can still be outside.
Pat, did
You
you
know
want to add
what?
anything?
I'm going to take a little credit for that.
Oh,
My first job out of college was as a social worker in Detroit Lakes.
oh,
And I started a hiking club while I was there.
Oh my
It
goodness.
wasn't specifically a women's hiking group, but it could have evolved into that.
Sure.
Our lives have crossed in so many ways.
Oh,
that
yes. Yeah.
One of the things that's kind of a challenge for the hiking leaders is the fact that people walk at different paces. So you sometimes end up with, I'll call them the slow walkers and the fast walkers. And it's the leader's responsibility to be sure that they know where all of their little chicks are.
Mhm.
They need to be the mother hen, and they need to
Right.
be sure that everything is safe.
Mhm.
So
That-
that is
that's-
one of the things that a leader has to really take into account.
Interestingly, that's been a concern I learned from my research. Excuse me. Right from the beginning, the first documents available for the club after it organized formally in 23 was that in addition to a hike leader, someone to bring up the rear end, which we now call a sweep, but back then had some different name, was designated as well. That probably was even more a concern when you're taking hikes across open country.
Right.
Than now when our hikes are entirely in built up or designated parks and reserves.
Mhm.
And cell phones
reason.
have made an enormous difference.
Well, yes, if you happen to have the cell phone for the hike leader, which
Oh, yes.
Right.
isn't a given. Well, normally we just rely on, they still rely on the hike leader to make sure she knows where everybody is. And that everybody knows when he or she turns a corner, so that everybody stays on route.
All right. Well, let's step back. We're going to go back again now, back to the 40s and 50s, and this was really the heyday of the club, the 40s and 50s. So, Bob, if you could tell us about those years, particularly how the war impacted the members, and then what happened after the war, and then also share a little bit about club member Charles Cluman.
Sure. I'll back up a little further than that since I left off in the 20s. The picture you see on the left is a club party from the 1920s. The people are all still pretty young. During the Depression, the club survived. Matter of fact, I don't think membership dipped too badly, although the club began holding membership drives in the late 30s. The club has never been priced out of anybody's pocket. The original dues were $1 a year. And for that, you got a paper printed schedule, perhaps with a subsidy from the Parks Department. And they just kept going all through the Depression, which was not amazing, but significant. The war, of course, made a big difference. The club had aged somewhat by the time World War II started. The newsletters at the time make reference to older members and to the kids. So the age range had spread out, but probably didn't reach much past people in their 40s at that point. There were enough draft age members so that a few dozen ended up in the armed forces, and also several women members enlisted and served long hitches during the war. The club was fortunate at the time to have a communications person, a person who typed out the newsletters and distributed them, a much bigger job than it is now, who would not only put out the normal schedule, but also assembled a monthly newsletter, which was sent to those members in the military who maintained contact with us. Really an extraordinary job. After the war, membership started to boom. It had been somewhere around 100 at the start of the war. Over the post-war years, the club reached a peak of, let's say, about 220 toward the end of the 1950s. That meant that a lot more activities were scheduled. Around 1950, the club, a club member was interested in putting together long trips by bus. The club went as far north as Banff National Park in Canada, and as far south as New Orleans, to the southwest. And according to one story from our most senior member, they ended up crossing the border and going into Mexico on that trip. And had enough interest in the membership so that they could sell those bus tours. Those actually persisted for quite a while, into the 1980s, at least. The last I know of was 1983 to Washington, D.C. That was the club's peak. The membership maintained or kept up to the 150 range into the 70s, and then continued a very slow decline. And the club also continued to age, eventually reaching its position now where virtually where the great majority of club members are retired.
And in the 50s, they kind of changed. They had done a lot of dancing before, but then what did they switch to in the 50s? What were some of the activities they did at that time?
They kept up with what the club members felt like doing. dancing and volleyball and softball went out the window, and just a gathering for picnics, and um, became the focus of the social events. The decline in the number of members, of course, limited the range of activities also.
I think
And then
one
there
of
were
the,
special things like the picture you see of the quiz of the two cities, where the or WCCO somehow got wind of the organizations, and as part of what seems to have been uh, a regular show, uh, competed on the radio to answer trivia questions.
yeah, they had one host from St. Paul, one host from Minneapolis, and then they pit the two teams against each other. So it was the St. Paul Hiking Club against the Minneapolis mini hikers.
Right.
And but all in great fun. And even though they were rivals, they did a lot of things together, right? They did hikes and different things.
Well, the Minneapolis Hiking Club existed. The clubs occasionally shared hikes in both cities.
Good. All right, so I'm going to do another question for you all. Well, actually, before we go there, I'd like you, Bob, if you could tell us a little bit about Mr. Kuhlman.
Yes, sorry, thanks for bringing that back up.
Yeah.
Among the members who enlisted during the war was Charles Kuhlman. The newsletters that talk about Charles portrayed him as the life of one of the people who was the life of the club. Always joking and happy. He enlisted in the Army, joined the medical corps, and almost at the end of the war was killed in action while rescuing a wounded soldier. The club remembers him still, and the club arranged after the war for a memorial of Charles to be posted at one of its popular gathering places, originally in Mounds Park, and was later transferred to Como Park, where it is not yet back on display after a renovation, but will be back in its original place when the zoo can manage it.
Okay, so now I have a question for all the panelists. So the group, as you had said, Bob, started with 24 members and then got up to 200 in the 40s and 50s. And then thanks to television, computers, longer work hours, and other responsibilities, dropped to much lower numbers. But now it's got back up to 100 again or so. So what I'd like to hear from any of you, all of you, is what is the club like now? So we might have prospective, members watching right now. So tell them what the club is like now, what some of your plans are for this anniversary year, and how you go about joining the club.
As I'm not a current member, so I can't answer that.
But you can talk also, Donna, about other things that you liked about when you were in it too.
Oh,
I would
but when I was, and that is, it's not that long ago. I did like, they always stopped for a light lunch somewhere at a restaurant afterwards, and which was more time to visit. And I thought that was very pleasant. Like I said, I met the lifelong members, or have met lifelong friends from that event. And hearing people's stories. I'm always interested in hearing people's stories. So when you walk with somebody that is new to you, you learn about them. And I like that.
I think it's pretty amazing that there are members who haven't, for physical reasons, been able to walk for a long time, but they are still members. They're still supportive of the group, and they still show up for our Christmas parties and our award banquets, because we have pretty good parties.
Okay.
And
I
Janice,
remember at one of them, I made arrangements for 10 or 12 people to ahead of time give me one of their hiking shoes, just loan it to me so I could make a little display and have people guess whose hiking shoe it was. And I remember saying that rich people have who's who, we have whose shoe. And it was just fun.
Yeah.
It's just a group of people that have a nice time together.
Mhm.
Janice was, in that respect, perhaps unconsciously reviving a feature of the club when the membership was younger in the 30s and 40s, whereby a person who wore a new pair of boots to a hike allegedly could count on having them forcibly removed during the course of the hike, so that they had to scramble to find them and get them back. The club obviously had its practical jokers. Since we've become primarily a senior group, that mercifully is no longer a feature.
so you no longer put frogs in people's boots?
No, and we don't have many opportunities to put grasshoppers down backs
Well,
and
that's good.
some of the other
That's-
stuff that they got
yeah.
up to. That those kids in the 30s and 40s got up to. Perhaps Pat could walk us through what a typical hike consists of from beginning to end.
I didn't catch what he said, everything he said.
Pat, could you walk us through how the hikes are organized and begin, and what happens during a hike and how they end?
Well, they have a schedule each month that comes out with the leaders and phone number and where they're going to meet. They try to be really detailed about, the location where they're going to be. And if there's, if they have something to eat, like afterwards, they might go somewhere or just have it out of the trunk of somebody's car too sometimes. And the hikes were like, Sundays were 5 miles. Tuesday was 3 miles. And I don't know, I always kind of look forward to when we got together though. Like we always had well, crap, I'm trying to think. An awards dinner. It was in April. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Month, yeah. And then they'd give out, like, for the people, the ones that led the most hikes or those that walked the most, maybe the top 10 in mileage, how far they walked. And then again in, I'm trying to think, July, we had a summer picnic. October, we had a wiener roast. I think it was September, October. And December, we had Christmas/holiday party. And quite a few came. We usually had, I think, around 40, 45 or so that came. Always had a good meal. Anyway, it was just fun getting together. And I was thinking, like, when they organize it, like Janice was saying, just keep an eye, make sure everybody stays together. They don't get too far apart. Once in a while, there was an accident or something, but that I don't know, I thought that was pretty rare. So just pretty much look forward to walking together.
And Pat, do you remember, were you in the club when they would do the midnight hikes?
Midnight, no, I don't. I didn't. I didn't ever.
The midnight hikes had to be, they were called moonlight. They would start at midnight on a night where there was a full moon. That was perhaps late rising, so it was up early in the, it was still up early in the morning. And they do a standard hike, 3 miles or 5 miles, and begin and end at a 24-hour restaurant, was the format as I understand it. There hasn't been a demand for that in my experience in the club, but it was one of the, it took a member who was interested in getting it going and keeping at least a small group interested.
Bob, can anybody join the club?
Anybody? Yes, you have to be we generally stay to over 18 these days. it's very rare that anybody under 30 comes and tries us out and actually come back, just because we don't move at a 30-year-old, an active 30-year-old's pace. Generally, generally we walk at about a 3 mile an hour rate, which
You do
is
Tuesday-
moderate.
You do Tuesday and Saturday hikes right now?
Tuesday and Sunday. The hikes in the 20s were on Saturdays, and but by 1930 they'd switched over mostly to Sundays, except for special events. And the
Bob, I know I'm
Tuesdays,
gonna, Bob, I know I'm gonna be joining again.
terrific.
Yes, I'm joining again. I'll just have to slow down a bit.
Right. If you're able, you can get the schedule on the club's website,
Right.
stpaulhike.com. Most of it's published in a few local papers,
Right.
and of course by word of mouth. We've been surprised this year, or the last 12 months during the pandemic, when we actually stopped hiking for several months
Oh, sure.
because of state restrictions, which we observed. That new members continue to come on board,
Good.
strictly through word of mouth, because we weren't putting in order to discourage guests from hiking, which we normally don't do. We stopped putting the schedule on the website, but we started again now.
Okay.
So we find out about it from a newspaper or from the website or by word of mouth. And if you show up for a hike, be on time, because we usually leave on the dot.
Yep.
It would be impossible to keep organized otherwise. And you just walk along. Everybody
Right.
knows how to walk.
Right.
And
right,
the group stays reasonably well together. And the hike leader has the route arranged. I've been a member going on 9 years now. I only remember a couple of leaders who got lost. Not really lost.
Okay.
Not really lost. Not
You're right.
lost in a major way, but just got off route and had to extend the hike to figure out where they were and how they get back to where they wanted to be. They have the route arranged. They try to make it an interesting route, and a loop rather than a there and back.
Right.
So that there's if you're not too busy talking to look around, you can look around and see something of more than passing interest.
Yes.
It's helped us, of course, that in the last 100 years, not only has the metropolitan area expanded in so much, but that the attention to maintaining parks and reserves and walking paths, both paved and unpaved, has just exploded.
Yes.
It's one reason Pat can keep, and the other members can keep going to new places, that those places are new. Although in my searches through the club's newsletter, which are on file right from which are on microfilm at the Historical Society or in our archive right from 1922, there's practically nowhere the club hasn't been, in the especially in Ramsey County.
so now that's how new members get involved. But now we're going to go back to the member who was the longest with the club. All right, and so his name, Bob found him in his research. His name was Jim Cowie, and he died in the 80s. He started when he was 30 years old. He died when he's in the 1980s. So no one here in this group knows him, but actually there is somebody who did know him, and that is Ann Cowie, who is the longtime chair of the Ramsey County Historical Society editorial board. And she was his great niece. So she is here with us. And Ann, if you would put your camera on and your Mike and tell us a little bit about what you know about your uncle and how much he loved the hiking club.
Okay, thank you, Meredith. Am I on?
Yep.
You're
There you
on,
are.
Ann.
Great. I can't see myself, but that's fine. Yes, it was very interesting when Meredith came to me and said, we are having an article in the magazine about the St. Paul Hiking Club. And I think that Cowie is an uncommon name. Do you know this person who is Bob's research has turned up, James Cowie? And I said, why, yes, that's Uncle Jim. And he would come to my grandparents. He was my grandfather's brother. And he would come to all the family dinners, Thanksgiving and Christmas. There was Uncle Jim. And he talked all the time about the hiking club. It was his, of course, I was, 2 generations younger. So I was a child and he was probably in his 60s and 70s by then. But he was still hiking. In fact, we found out that, as Meredith said, he was the longest member he was in the hiking club for 60 years. And when he was 70, he hiked, in 1963, he hiked 328 miles. So he won the award for the, most miles hiked. And he was always talking about how his friends in the hiking club and what a good time they had, what fun parties they had. I think he was a bachelor, and I think a lot of his friends were women, which he kind of enjoyed. And it was his social time. It was his exercise. He was very spry. He talked all the time. And so I'm sure that he would have talked a lot to whoever his hiking partners were on the hikes. But anyway, it's sort of a little serendipitous thing that the magazine is publishing this article, and you all are current members, and I have never met anybody in the hiking club before, and it's good to meet you all virtually. And just know that it's an important part of our family history. It's Uncle Jim and the hiking club. So it's a great thing. I live over near the Minneapolis lakes, and when I have dates with my friends to walk around the lakes, and it's a wonderful way to get the exercise that we seniors are supposed to be getting, and to just talk with friends and have a good time, see wildlife. I walk with my partner Bruce. Today we went to Wood Lake in Richfield and walked a couple miles, and it's just a wonderful way to get out. So good for all of you for being longtime members and enjoying it so much. And think of Uncle Jim and
keep walking. Yeah.
walking.
We hope we'll have a chance to see you at our centennial celebration, which forcibly was postponed until July,
Yeah.
when we'll have a picnic, and we will invite members to walk that as much as is possible of that original hiking route.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And perhaps have a dinner with a program as well.
Well, that is something. It's a good way to get everybody out and commemorate, hopefully, the end of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it'll be nice because you won't have the ice. When we did it in January, there was a lot of ice and it was very cold. We stopped to take a picture for all of, a minute. And I think by the time we were done, we were just frozen. So it'll be a little warmer in July.
Right, the silver lining, I suppose you'd call it, that we'll probably be able to get many more folks involved in July than we would have been able to in January.
All right, so you've heard everybody just likes to hike, and so I'm going to go back to my friend Henry David Thoreau again. And on April 26th, 1841, so 180 years ago this week, he wrote in his journal, "It is a great art to saunter." So this question that I'm going to pose next is for our audience here. You can put your answers in the chat and Robin will read them. Why do you hike, or why do you want to take up hiking? And where in the Twin Cities or in Minnesota do you like to hike, or would you like to hike? So this is a chance for our audience to key in on that, if you'd like to take a minute. Because we know there's a lot of hikers out there. In fact, there's a lot of hiker organizations. These are just a few of them. So if you want to put your thoughts in the notes.
While everybody's putting those notes in, and again, feel free to add any questions you have for the panelists. Liz made a comment earlier that it was so interesting seeing the clothing of the earlier time period.
Yes, we were fortunate to find that picture of Grace Cummings and her fellow employee, whose name was Lillian Lee, who arranged the first hike, in their full-length photo in their hiking gear. In the St. Paul newspaper, it was the way the first hike was advertised in the dispatch the day before the hike. They have their hiking sticks. They're bundled up for the weather, which on the day of the first hike was a high of 10 degrees. So it was typical Minnesota weather. Where the hikers don't dress like that anymore, even in January.
Yeah,
They weren't wearing picture hats.
Yeah, the picture
like
hats
that,
and amongst the trees must have been a little bit difficult. So Anne mentioned the reason she hikes is to get exercise and appreciate nature. And Rich mentioned that he hikes the Grand Portage Trail in Northeast Minnesota. And I've been on that one as well, and it's fantastic if you haven't done it. Does anybody else have any comments or questions for the?
You know, I'd like to go back to when Anne was saying that her uncle received an award for hiking 328 miles. My award beat that by 2 miles. Mine was 330. But I only came in 4th place that year.
Oh,
First place was close to 500.
Wow.
Yes, she's still a hiker as far as I know. Very dedicated one. She missed very few of the hikes.
She must have gone. There must have been special event. There must have been special events included in that one. The hike, since the club normally hikes 8 miles a week total over
Right.
50 weeks.
Right.
So, but there would have been special hikes to state parks and other places. So that you
Well,
could
there was
get
a
up to
period
that
of
total.
time when we were actually doing 3 hikes per week. There was the Sunday 5-mile one, and then on Tuesday there was the traditional 3-mile evening one, but there were also some daytime Tuesday ones.
right.
Yeah, so she was doing a lot of hiking, but I just thought, you know, I should really give her credit for that, because when I'm so proud of my little paper award, it was really only 4th place.
That's a lot of miles, though.
So Nancy mentioned that she likes walking, especially in the woodlands, which renews her. She is relatively new to Minnesota and she would like to hike in more state parks. So a small plug for our state parks. We have great state parks in Minnesota. We also have some wonderful natural recreation areas and of course the Boundary Waters. And we also have the, let's see if I can get this right, the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, which stretches from north of the Twin Cities all the way down to Hastings. It's a different kind of national park. It encompasses a lot of the regional parks in the area. So check that out online. It's really fun to explore those parks. Gail says the Carpenter Nature Center is her favorite place. And Liz mentions that she enjoys southeastern Minnesota, Red Wing, Lake City, Winona. As the saying goes, motion is lotion. So if any of our panelists want to share your favorite places, I'm sure people would like to hear, a little bit about where you like to go to.
One of my favorite hikes that we took as a club was in Mendota. We were walking along the Mississippi River. And I remember that we saw 3 wild turkeys and then proceeded downhill and saw a whole school of Asian carp just jumping out of the water like crazy. And it's the only time that I've ever seen them. That was pretty awesome. I like that one.
There are so many places that are so wonderful. I don't think I have a favorite. And when Bob and I have hiked in national parks, as we travel, any place we go, we hike. So I just can't pick one. There's too many that are so wonderful.
Well, I don't know, Donna and Pat, if you will remember this hike, but and a particularly memorable one for me was when that Sister Marianne Faith led. She was a spry old bugger. She led a hike that in the woods behind the College of St. Catherine. Now the woods was really not very big. I would say about the size of a baseball field. And it was in winter with lots of snow on the ground. And for an hour, she led us back and forth and through that woods. She took us around trees, over branches, under things. And it was so strenuous that by the time all of us were so overheated from the exertion that we were all, trying to remove our scarves and our hats. But she kept us walking for an entire hour in that small area.
Wow.
That was a really interesting one.
I think the hikes that go to areas of natural splendor, you might say, are the more popular ones for our group. Sure. Although by the numbers, the largest groups we get tend to be related more to weather for the group for the membership we have now, spring and fall, when it's not, as the nursery rhyme goes, it's not too hot and it's not too cold, and everybody can stay pretty comfortable and within their comfort range. But nature. But I got some real nice comments on the last hike I read, which had no nature to it at all. It was, just to give you an example, it was 5 miles around the perimeter of downtown. Oh. We started in the old Sears parking lot, walked up north of the Capitol, the University Avenue, back across the freeway on Robert Street, went to southeast to THS Field, walked past Union Depot and down to the river to the nice, to the beautiful walkway along the river. I guess you'd have to call that nature if you call the Mississippi at downtown St. Paul natural, which of course it isn't. And then up again and through that historic neighborhood south of Ramsey House. I'll remember that park's name.
Irvine?
Irvine, thank you. Past Ramsey House, across West 7th, through the hospital grounds to the walkway over the freeway, and back up to Summit Avenue, around the cathedral, and back to the parking lot. No nature to speak of, but there was a lot to look at. There was
Mhm.
enough up and down to satisfy people who do like to do hills, and people thought it was great. But more often than not, we're looking for trees and lakes
Right.
and mild forms of wildlife.
And I had the pleasure of living by the Gateway Trail. So from my home, I could walk down the trail around Phelan Lake and back home. And that's about a 6.5-mile hike. And I could do that whenever I had enough energy. So I like hikes with water and nature.
And I grew up next to Phelan Lake, so I led a lot of hikes around that lake
Mhm.
and stopped sometimes to give them a little bit of the history of it. And in fact, at some of our hiking club parties, that was my function, I guess, is that I had gathered together some old newspaper clippings about some of the old hiking club activities. And so I would read to them what had happened, you know, in the 1920s or the 1930s. And and people enjoyed hearing about it. They enjoyed the description of the clothing that they were wearing and the description of where they hiked. So there was a real historic emphasis.
Sure.
If you go back far enough, you begin encountering hike routes that can't be followed anymore. Exactly, like the first hike, which, as I mentioned, went from around the modern intersection of Burns Avenue and Highway 61
Right.
down to the Highwood neighborhood to Point Douglas Road. Point Douglas Road no longer runs continuously. Actually, only a few years after the club started, they ran Highway 61 in there. So the route would cross the Highway 61 roadway, which isn't a good idea.
One of those newspaper clippings that I found made a special point of saying that that on a very strenuous hike along the Mississippi River banks, it was necessary for the members to hoist each other up onto the next level, even though many of the ladies were wearing wool skirts at the time.
Yes,
Unbelievable. Yeah.
there was I don't know if it's the same one you mean, but there was a special hike like that. It wasn't a normal club thing during the war, which was written, which earned a photo feature in the Sunday paper, which we've retrieved. And that's what they were doing. They're going down into a ravine and scrambling their way back up out of it.
And Charles Kuhlman and Uncle Jim were on that hike.
Oh.
So I'm sure Uncle Jim was enjoying pushing some of those ladies up.
There you go.
Very good. Any other questions or comments or memories?
Mary mentioned that and reminded everybody that the Ramsey County Park System does have numerous wonderful trails as well for biking and walking and picking your dog out. So again, we want to urge everybody to get outside, especially as the weather gets nicer. I want to thank our panelists and thank Meredith for emceeing tonight. Please check out our website at rchs.com for upcoming programs. We have some great programs that are coming up and we're adding more all the time. So continue to check in. We have some great programs coming up at Gibbs Farm in July. And also check out our new coloring book. We have a great new coloring book and Meredith can maybe say a few words about that. But again, thank you to Bob and Donna and Janice and Pat and Ann for stepping in. And I'm going to turn it over to Meredith for a few last words. But don't feel you have to go. I'm going to turn off the recording after Meredith is done and feel free to unmute and turn on your video and share if you would like to do that. So Meredith, any wrap up?
Before I do the wrap up, I just wanted to share my my impression of the state parks around here. We moved here in 2018 from Indiana. And so since COVID, there was really not a whole lot to do. So we have just done state parks almost every single weekend. And we did the Cuyuna State Rec Park in March. And we finished the hike and we came by one of those lakes that was a mine. And there were divers diving under the ice. And every time I turn around, Minnesota surprises me, hiking on the ice. And you know, even the day that we went out with the hiking club and it was 15 degrees, I was sure that Bob was going to cancel that hike. Oh my God. But then when I saw that there were divers diving in these mines in March under the ice, I just, this state is crazy. But you do see all kinds of fun things on these hikes, and I really like them. And then Bob was mentioning the city hike that we did right through Urban Park. So this week was our soft launch of the Urban Park coloring book. It's our first coloring book in a series. Next year we'll launch a Rondo coloring book. And so the Urban Park one focuses on 18 homes. We couldn't do all of the homes, so it's not all of them in that area, but there are 18. And Jeannie Cosfeld is the illustrator for that, and then Dick Crownick did the research and just short little histories about some of the homes. And so that is available online now. And beginning this weekend, we'll do more of a big launch on the 15th of May, and it involves hiking or walking, I guess. Dick, the author, will take small groups on a little hike of that area. You'll get a chance to. The ticket includes the hike and a coloring book. It is limited to 16 people each, just because of COVID and masks are required. But so that will be our. It's not the big launch that we wanted, but it's a small one. And then Dick and Jeannie, Dick will be offering other hikes during the summer. And then Jeannie, the illustrator, will be offering some chances to go sit there in the square in Urban Park, and she'll teach you how to sketch some of those houses. So there's lots of opportunities there. So we're very excited about that. Robin's been working very hard on the marketing. So it gives, maybe your club would be interested in doing that hike. So thanks to everybody. And any other questions or comments? Anybody want to unmic themselves? You can, those of you who currently have your cameras off.
We'll stop the recording. Thank you, everybody. And just a reminder, if you'd like to sign up for those walking tours of Irvine Park, those will be available starting on Saturday, registrations for that. So again, thank you all for coming. Thank you to all our speakers. And thank you to the St. Paul Hiking Club for 100 wonderful years of St. Paul history. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Meredith.